we'll continue with our journey this afternoon. We're going to look now in particular at the Ukraine facility plan and the role that it can play in helping to drive forward some of the recovery and the opportunities that our previous panelists have shared with us. To help us do this, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage three very distinguished speakers who certainly know as much, if not more than I do about these topics. So without further ado, if I could welcome Dirk Stratmann from the German Agribusiness Alliance, Nazar Babitsky, who I already introduced from the Ukrainian Club of Agriculture, and to kick us off, Gilles Driancourt, Vice President at John Deere, just to share with us a few opening slides on the paper that was referred to earlier. So Dirk, Nazar, if you want to take a seat, you're welcome to take a seat, Gilles, but you may want to stand and postulate.
Yeah, well,
welcome.
I think people will see me better if I stand up. So, okay, thanks. It's about me here. It's don't be impressed by all these titles. That's just the benefit of aging. So, yeah. So we wrote this paper. I must say I wrote it in May, June last year. And there is something we need to change in the title. It's after. Because the minister rightly addressed that we were too optimistic. At that time, we thought that at this time the war would be over, and of course, all the measures we propose will be included. So, thanks. What is the next? Is the green one? Okay. So yeah, we were there with Sally, and we presented this paper to your mission, by the way, in last July. So that was you also gave some input in it, but somebody told me today that's a nice paper because it has been written by a Westerner. So and there is not too much Ukrainian biases in it. Hopefully, it's true. So what is the paper about? By the way, you have like 4 parts or chapters. One is to show, and that has been already spoiled a little bit, that, like a spoiler, Ukraine is a key player in global food security. I will just give some very short figures. Ukraine is agriculture is also fundamental for the Ukraine's economy. And also, everything has been already mentioned. The war has an immense toll on Ukraine's agriculture. You will see some striking pictures here. And if you summarize the whole paper, we propose like 14 lines of actions in different ways. So, but I summarize them. So yeah, Ukraine is a major contributor to the global food security. It has like 25% of the most fertile soils in the world, the famous Black Earth. I think there is a location, I'm not sure it's Ukrainian. If you plant a stick in this earth, a tree will grow. So I don't know if it's true, but needs to be experienced. It used to export to 150 countries, so it's quite a lot, covers almost all the world. And it also feeds through, especially the global food program, the UN World Food Program, countries which are under food stress or they face scarcity, so like Somalia, Eritrea, and so on. So it's a major contributor to not only food security but also political stability, because with let's say the food supply you get some stability or instability. So that is something we need to keep in mind. So that has been said. But I guess you recognize this picture. That's where we are. And it's a striking figure. And just imagine that Ukraine feeds 400 million. You said that. But when 400 million is a very theoretical number. But if you multiply this city, which we are in, by 333, that's what is the contribution of Ukraine. So it needs like 333 times Brussels every year. Just an amazing and a striking, let's say, picture. So you also mentioned, so you spoil a lot actually, that it's about 10% of the GDP of, well, agriculture is about 10% of the GDP. So in comparison, I will take a figure purposely. In Germany, it's about 0.8. So it's 12 times the contribution of agriculture in Germany. So 75% of the grains are used to be exported. I don't have the latest figures. And it's now it's a little bit more, actually, because it's all data. I think I checked that my collaborator, it's 26%. And if you take all the ag products, I think we are around 40% of the export revenues. So it's the priority sector. That's the main message of the paper. So the war immense toll, I mean, you can hear that, but you don't see it. We have amazing pictures here. So my former colleagues from John Deere will recognize the piece of equipment there. And you have some of the brands. They have been shelled or they hit a landmine. I mean, it's quite amazing. And also that is an unfortunate picture where you see the cattle being killed. So that happens. So we cannot ignore it. So the total damage is huge if you include, let's say, foregone income. But just to share one figure is that according to our latest estimates, we are above 5 billion for machinery being stolen, destroyed, or poorly maintained because it's in a conflict area and people don't have enough money to maintain the equipment. So all in all, the damages for machinery is about $5 billion. It's a huge figure, and of course, there was already a lack of agricultural equipment in Ukraine. So another dimension of the conflict is landmines. And we do, as an industry, encourage all the industry to connect to NGOs which are specialized. My own company, John Deere, has a partnership with Hallo. For instance, we equipped these tractors, but I know that others do the same. It's quite critical. There are very different figures about the numbers here, but at least 500,000 hectares have been polluted or mined. And that's a real issue, and you can see that where all the green dots, by the way, are, let's say, areas which have been heavily landmined. It's really a huge issue because, of course, you cannot farm the land if it's mined. And that will remain for a long time. It's very unfortunate with wounded people in the future. I mean, it's tragedy. So, in a nutshell, the paper is about this, and I encourage you to have a look at it because every title here is a chapter. So I cannot go into detail. I will open the floor for discussion. But access to finance for all farms is a big issue because if you don't have treasury and if you don't have cash, you cannot do anything. So you are out of the business. And I heard that the ministry launched this leasing program, which was in our thoughts. It's very good news. The rest, I mean, keeping people also in the rural areas is something extremely important because if people go away, they don't come back most of the time. If they move to the Western countries or they move to other places, displaced people, I think that the UN figure tells that 14 million Ukrainians have been displaced. I mean, it's a huge number. It's very disturbing. We need to support the communities to stay home with all kind of means. I cannot go into detail. You can read that. There was a very fruitful experience from our standpoint, which was a SAPARD program, which was meant for the new members of the EU, so new member states. Perhaps Tassos has a different opinion, but we really enjoy this program. It helped a lot to modernize, let's say, the eastern part of Europe and the central part with new equipment, and that was very well designed. We think it should be a source of inspiration for the EU when it comes to its own facility. And, well, I was also very pleased to hear that it's the last one, the red ones I just wanted to highlight. There is a huge perspective for Ukraine to become the biofuel platform, and why not biomethane, by the way, for the EU as a whole. I mean, there is a huge potential there, which will not be really conflicting with, well, we could argue about that, of course, also, but food production. And also it's a matter of national security for for Ukraine to have more energy independency. So in a nutshell, that's about the paper. It's available online on the SEMA website, so have a look. It's an open platform for discussion, so it's not like a Bible. There is no truth in it. It's just the moment of truth, if I would say. And things change over time, so it could be always improved, but that's what we will certainly advocate for in Brussels and elsewhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Gilles, thank you very much indeed. So we'll open it up to our panelists now as well. A couple of questions prompting from me, but I do want to bring in your perspective from the audience as well. So let's try and have a dialogue to go here. Nazar, maybe I can start with you. A very similar question to what I put to Minister Vysotsky. When you look at the different elements that Gilles had up there in terms of access to finance, access to fertilizer, rebuilding the infrastructure. Minister Vysotsky talked about energy security as being almost foundational. What's foundational for you, and what then needs to come over the medium to long term to help put Ukrainian agriculture recovery again on that correct trajectory?
I think I would be able to, I think I agree with Minister Vysotsky. Foremost priority is that access to energy and energy security is paramount, and it's very immediate. I think Minister Vysotsky was speaking not so much from, let's say, rational perspective, but even from the emotional perspective, because as we speak, the Russians really ramped up their air raids against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Regretfully, they have been quite successful in reducing, let's say, available power generation capacities in Ukraine. Population already feels regular, let's say, blackouts, but they say controlled blackouts by our grid operator. But I can only imagine what businesses and industry feels, and agriculture is no exception, especially since Ukraine has always been pushing towards higher value-added intensive agriculture like poultry, like dairy, processing in sunflower oil, etc. So rebuilding energy infrastructure, and this is almost an impossible task considering that Russia is still hovering over all of us with the threat of additional strikes, is a real priority. But then as we progress into the less immediate future, I would say we have three whales on which this flat earth of recovery, if I may use this biblical expression, will rest. It's, of course, availability to leverage finance in order to spur the recovery and reconstruction. Second, that's the second one. The third one would be restoring access to markets, restoring that lifeline of income revenues, modernization, and eventually raising economic and social level, which sustained not only the agricultural sector of the Ukrainian agricultural sector, but also the economy at large. Ukraine has never had the luxury of being in the benefiting from agricultural subsidies the way their European peers were. So in fact, earning the way out was the key, and it remains the key. So basically restoring access to global markets, but also benefiting in a very, balanced and managed way through closer links with the European and single market, through economic integration, will also be a key. From our perspective, from the perspective of the Ukrainian agricultural sector, which I have an honor to represent here in Brussels, we see steps in the right direction. One step, of course, a very important step, immediate, let's say, was the launch of the Ukraine facility. The Ukraine facility is not a panacea. It is a propping tool to encourage, first, international financial institutions to be bolder, to be more comprehensive, and to be, let's say, fearless in terms of dealing with financial risks existing in Ukraine, and targeting more forcefully their clients. Second, I would say the trade measures, the extension of trade measures for Ukraine, the EU additional trade preferences was an important step forward. But unfortunately, we're also hostage to this big wave of political backlash that we are seeing across Europe from European farmers. And Ukraine is not a some try to portray Ukraine as a victim, not a victim, but as a part of the problem, while we are rather a victim and potential part of the solution. That's what we are trying to drive this message. But unfortunately, that limited the options available, and that forced the European Commission to look to put their, let's say, to limit their options in helping Ukraine, paying their dues to the political necessities of the day. And the third, and this is the largest, let's say, strategic paradigm that we are working in, is the launch of the pre-accession negotiations. That's the ultimate prize, not only for Ukrainian agricultural sector, as we speak it from our sector perspective, but also for Europe and Ukraine at large. Again, without going too much into this general debate, I would simply say that Europe's food sovereignty is unattainable without Ukraine. Europe's food sovereignty, food security, and ability to project itself again as a world power in terms of global agriculture, global commodity agriculture, is possible only with Ukraine. There is this universal saying that we must see the forest behind the trees. The trees today are these political reactions, political emotions of the day from the farmer community. They are legitimate, but the ability of the statesman to look beyond, to explain, to educate, but also to see that big prospects are coming once we have strategic patience working with Ukraine should be maintained. I stop here.
I hope you won't, because I have a couple of follow-up questions to that. I'm going to pick on two. First of all, the role of the IFIs, the international finance institutions, and some of the money that is being committed by the international donor community. Is that coming at a pace that is quick enough to de-risk the investment that is needed in Ukraine for the recovery? That's the first question. The second one, and I leave it to you which one you want to choose in order. You're as aware as all of us are the political dialogue that we've had in Europe over the last couple of months and manifested itself in the elections last weekend. What more can we do, should we be doing, to build that understanding of partnership rather than competition between Ukraine and the producer countries in Europe?
Mm-hmm. Very good. I will start from the first question. I think the main vector is the right one. I think the European Commission correctly seized the moment and perceived the priorities by launching the Ukraine facility, particularly Pillar 2, where they would like to encourage, through RFIs, bolder and more targeted investments to support Ukraine's private sector recovery, including agriculture. But I agree with you, Mark, that pace is insufficient. I would say there is still timidity. And moreover, something that everyone outside the institutions like to criticize about the institutions is bureaucracy and, let's say, entanglement in this procedural minutiae. And I think that would simply, we run the risk of discrediting the entire enterprise. Mm. And we have a message, a very clear message that we are pushing forward here from Brussels, from our office, but also we encourage SEMA participants, SEMA members to join our growing voice, is that the only way to avoid this ivory tower of bureaucracy and timidity is to have a robust link with the business community in Ukraine, with international investors working in Ukraine, particularly members, distinguished members of the SEMA, members of the ELO, in order to have a proper feedback. What triggers investment? How Ukraine facility instrument can trigger positive investment decisions from every one of us to contribute to recovery, to contribute to reconstruction. Because otherwise we see it as we talk to the European Commission officials, as we talk to IFIs, as we talk to national development banks, member states development banks that like to pick up to use the opportunity by Ukraine facility. We see that not only, let's be frank, the firepower represented by Ukraine facility is insufficient. We simply hope it's the first step. And somehow it can be leveraged by either contributions of individual member states or perhaps private sector. But what we would like to see is that there is a very clear, robust connection and feedback between the decision makers on how to distribute Pillar 2 funding, the toolbox, and the business community simply will guide them. And this is unfortunately what is missing. What we are also, and I'm finishing here, what we are also concerned is that there is no institutional framework for this connection between the European facility, let's say, machinery that makes decision, IFIs, and the business community. When we read the Ukraine facility regulation, that particular institutional link is missing. And we all know that European bureaucrats work by the book. If there is no line in the rule, they will not do this. But while they will put a very good, let's say, cover story which explains their successes and covers their weaknesses. So I think that's the message that we would like to ask everyone to support. Second one, about the compromises that you mentioned. We had the first heat of the battle in January to May this year when we we had a heated debate with representatives of European agricultural associations that argued that Ukrainian agri imports flood Europe. That will be the end of farm as they know it in Europe, and then everything will be lost. We were able somehow to stand our ground in terms of argumentation and to show that Ukraine is not a scapegoat. There are larger forces at play in terms of global prices depression. Competition from our other global players ranging from the US to Mercosur to Southeast Asia. And last but not least, we were able by our own means to restore traditional logistical routes through the Black Sea. So the pressure is easing. But again, as I said previously, let's not lose the larger picture. Ukraine contributes, well, we had a line. We had a line which was particularly appealing to our Spanish colleagues. We point out with the fact that Spain remains by far in Europe the largest importer of Ukrainian cereals as animal feed. Hence the motto, Ukrainian grain makes Spanish jamon globally competitive. I think that counts. That's the message that we have been saying to each and every country, from the Netherlands even to Poland, that synergies is something that is a forest behind the trees. And seize the potential of these synergies in order to build more secure and more competitive European agri-food business sector for the future. Thank you.
Nazar, thank you very much indeed for that. A lot of what you just said there is a good segue into you, Dirk, if I may bring you in at this point. I know from our conversation just over the lunch, hugely experienced in Ukraine. To this point that Nazar mentioned about the framework that will engage business with the international governance framework that's gone around it, the financial assistance, Nazar is implying it's necessary, but the pace isn't sufficient yet. What's your perspective on that from the German Agribusiness Alliance and also your own experience in industry of getting Ukraine what it needs from the business community?
Thanks for the question and thank you for having us here. I hope that in today's conversation we can build a bridge between Berlin and Brussels and back so that it becomes a really European, I would say, context. Your question, I would say the agricultural sector of Ukraine, looking at the CIS region, has been the most innovative, progressing sector before the war. And it was mentioned by my colleagues here, there was no significant subsidies, so efficiency was the driver of any development. And of course, UCAP, you are representing larger agro holdings, but there's also mid-sized companies that have still a couple of thousand hectares, and there's a lot of family farms that all contribute to this performance. And of course, we typically talk about the larger scale organizations that are very IT driven. They already use with technology that in some established EU Western markets is still hard to be introduced. So they have been jumping, they have been doing some quantum leaps in the past. What has not been developing along the lines was the educational system, and also I would say the rules and regulations around the ag sector. And if you want to describe it in a little bit of a relaxed manner, it's still a little bit of the Wild East in a way that yes, you can do very structured, very straightforward business. However, the speed of saying yes to something and maybe signing something and then making it happen in daily life, make it sustainable, this has been, I would say, a challenge in many occasions. And I would say farmers are used to ups and downs. So they're very resilient typically. It's either too wet, it's too hot, it's too dry. So I think they have a very high capacity to adjust. On the other side, they also need, if they go towards European Union, they need a kind of framework that helps them, I wouldn't say, with some guidance. And this is, and maybe now talking on behalf of GAA, we are observing that, of course, farmer protests throughout Europe against bureaucracy. If you want to do this copy-paste on Ukraine, the conflict is pre-programmed. So what we are trying to do is we have tried, and this is unrelated to the current decisions here in Brussels, which we truly welcome, we are representing from seed, fertilizers, earmarks for animals to agricultural machinery. What we have tried is to split it down, for example, on seeds, bringing the German Seed Association together with the Ukrainian Seed Association. We call it Path to One, helping both sides to understand, first of all, where they're coming from and where they may have to go to, but avoiding the stress of, oh my God, what do we have to fulfill from a Brussels perspective? And make it practical. Of course, companies, members of GAA, they will never be able to replace an authority, a sovereign authority in a given country, but there have been so many lessons learned over decades. If you don't use this knowledge and know-how, and you are starting from pure scratch, I think you're wasting a lot of time and energy. And so where we see ourselves, and I'm reusing the word bridge, building bridges between experiences, best practices that have been done, and helping in the Ukrainian context to adjust. And I think, and this, for me, Ukrainians have I mentioned it this morning in a different conversation, they have a genetic advantage. They fall, they stand up, and they run, because there's nobody having an insurance package for them to cover this up. And so it is now just to help them, not to correct their initial behavior, but rather to help them when they continue to run again, to run at the right speed, in the right direction, and not, to be faster than they can allow themselves. And I think when we talk about French, UK, German farmers, of course they have a concern. But there's so many other niche market products where you can start with organic, with all kind of value added in Ukraine, bring it into European Union. You don't have to go for a straight competition. And the word was mentioned, partnership. And I mean, feeding the world is a team sport. And this is, I think, where we, maybe all in this room, when we can create the environment over time, that this is not seen as an aggressive interaction, but it's seen as joining forces to move forward. So not have the conflicting energy, but rather the forward-moving energy. So that would be, hopefully that answers a little bit your question.
It certainly does. I mean, you both of you, I think, have touched on elements there that are important. I mean, you talked about building bridges, the sharing the knowledge, the understanding. I loved your description of Ukrainian grain feeding the Iberian ham. That makes such logical sense. I do also sometimes think, I mean, I've always found it a privilege to work in this industry. Whenever I went to Ukraine, I came away learning more than what I ever anticipated, in part because of the environment that you had and perhaps the lack of access to subsidy. If you were going to do it, you're going to do it yourself. So enormous innovation, as you say there. Gilles, I'm going to come back to you, Dirk, on the role of Germany in particular. But Gilles, with your CIMA hat on, but also your John Deere hat on, when you reflect on what you wrote in the paper a year ago, where we are today, what progress do you think we're making? And how confident are you from your own company's perspective that the environment is becoming, I don't want to say de-risked, but even more supportive for companies like yours to invest in, operate, maintain, grow, develop your operations in Ukraine?
Very difficult question as the war still lasts. I mean, I'd like first to come back, if I may, to a question you asked to the panelists, which is about the tensions between the EU and Ukraine. I think we should keep in mind that this tension occurred because of a war. I mean, it seems not to be connected, but it's really connected. And one of the reasons is because Ukraine lost partially its access to global markets. And I think one of the solutions to alleviate this issue is really to support Ukraine to get access to the global market again to the same extent it has before, because otherwise, I mean, we will be stuck in the same problem. The other thing also, thanks, by the way, my former and dear colleague Dirk here, mentioning that we should not think about only big farms or big companies. I think we need also to keep in mind the urgency to support small farms, family farms, especially those who are close to the front line. Because, I mean, it should work like an insurance system by which you accept the idea that you might lose your investments, but it's absolutely needed to stabilize rural population. That's two remarks from the paper I wanted to share at this stage. About the progress, really, I mean, it's very difficult to measure, but first because I don't have any concrete figures, so it will be very difficult. So we were very positively, let's say, surprised by the fact that it's so resilient. I mean, that Ukraine, under these dire circumstances, was able to export and to produce so much. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, nobody would have expected that. It shows the level of resilience. And that shows also very good perspective for the future, because if Ukraine is able to reach such a level of production and let's say, deliver so well under these circumstances, just imagine what could happen if we would go fast to peacetime and with a sound recovery program. I think with John Deere, I mean, what I can hear internally is that Ukraine is a very promising market for the future, because we'll be disconnected from others. I don't have to be here too strategic to say whom we might be disconnected from, but it's quite obvious. Many countries, there are kind of blocks forming again, so we see Ukraine as a huge potential for developing our business and for the whole industry, by the way, not for us, because they need all kind of equipment. The good thing is that I know many companies try to support their dealership. Keep that in mind. I mean, whatever you do for your dealership is the promise of the future, because without dealership, you cannot basically sell your equipment. And we have, of course, a huge issue with some experts or technicians being mobilized to go on the front. So we have to train people to be able to supply the same kind of services, especially women, for instance. That is something we need to invest in. But there is definitely priority, focus, and we try to help. partially this paper is the outcome of the industry. So the industry think we need to do something, and we allocate resources, means, people like me and some others to think about and propose solutions. So you see, that's the best message I can deliver under these circumstances.
Very good. Thank you, Gilles. Any questions, comments, observations from our distinguished colleagues in the audience? My word, I'm going to have to make sure you get injected with coffee then in order to stimulate your thinking. Yes, sir.
There is one here.
There we go. Could you just hang on for the microphone so that those that are following have it? If you just introduce yourself, sir, and then your question. Thank you.
Is it working? My name is Antonio Albaladejo. I am a policy analyst at the European Parliamentary Research Service. First of all, Mr. Bobitsky, as a Spaniard, thank you for the jamón.
I mean it.
So my question is regarding food security that you mentioned and the role that Ukraine plays in European food security. In particular, I would like to know your thoughts more on the current food security, on the future, and particularly on the biggest issue that we're facing for European food security, which is the protein deficit. Because if I'm not mistaken, I believe that last year Ukrainian production of soybean, which is our biggest deficit, we have a very low self-sufficiency for this protein. The production of Ukraine was nearly double that of the European Union. And that's not frequently discussed, so I would like to know if you could just spare a couple of minutes on where do you see this going from the future to the future, and how could Ukraine help close the gap at the deficit of proteins in the European Union?
Shall I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for your question. In fact, we registered with great interest the discussions that the Belgian presidency had at several occasions at the EU Council for Agriculture and Fisheries, that they pointed out that European food sovereignty is impossible without, proper access to plant proteins. And at least as far as the soybeans is concerned, Ukraine is one of the very few countries in Europe. I think it's also, to a lesser degree, Romania within Europe, that has a very unique combination of natural endowment with climate, with resources, and let's say long existing traditions and investments in agriculture, whereby soybeans have been very prominent or growing sector. That's true. And in fact, I think we will have to check the figures, and I would be very happy to connect with you after the event. But soybean sector and oilseed sector in Ukraine was one of the very few in the course of the last years that retained profitability, while the rest of the cereals production, the rest of agricultural commodities exports were in the red for the very unhappy combination of transport costs, so this unnatural logistics through overland route through Poland and Romania, of course the depression of global prices, and this occasional, not occasional, but rather systematic political sabotage by farmer protests on the borders. That's true. But in fact, what I would say, without going into the details, but we would be very happy to look into the analysis, the statistics that we have, and talk with you later. Ukraine can really be a complementary to Europe in terms of access to plant proteins. When we look at the fundamentals, we see why it happens as compared with, for instance, with Mercosur supply. First, it's logistics. Danube Delta, Danube route is one of the most efficient inland waterways logistical solutions that can offer prime access to those soya growing regions in South Ukraine that would eventually feed and provide access to across Europe. Second is that, again, because of the combination of natural endowment with climate and Ukraine's ability, let's say, the Ukrainian agriculture sector from the start being disciplined by the compliance with the EU phytosanitary requirements already gives you a better solution in terms of sustainability, in terms of plant health, and compliance with standards. You already remove a lot of, let's say, a lot of potential objections in terms of how these plant proteins can contribute, whether they fit into the very strict requirements of sustainability and climate, let's say, policies of the EU. And third, last but not least, is, again, significant potential in productivity gains. These productivity gains can be gained through, let's say, once the war is over, we would need to work on improving the irrigation capacity, access to water in the south of Ukraine. The consequences of Kakhovka disaster, the destruction of the dam, have to be remedied, but remedied in a more ecologically sustainable way, not replicating the Soviet approach that created the cascade in the first place. Here, benefiting from the European technical expertise, and also while keeping in mind environmental standards, the new approach, the European Green Deal approach, would be fundamental. So precision agriculture and smart use of plant protection products and, let's say, other inputs to boost productivity would be also very important. And the best way to do this is to follow, let's say, to keep in mind the standards and requirements that are now being implemented in Europe under the edges of sustainability and European Green Deal requirements, but also, learning from the practices of European farmers. So perhaps I didn't put it very eloquently, but it's a very good topic to explore. Most importantly, there is a willingness and there is ability from the part of Ukrainian farmers who work in the sector to offer the synergies to Europe.
And see, now the deluge comes. Excellent. So we've got about 10 minutes of this session left, so I'm going to try and get through as many as possible. Lady here, if we can pass the microphone, again, say who you are and where you're from, and then we'll go on the other side of the aisle.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks for having all of us in this conversation. My name is Alexandra Avramenko. I'm also the colleague of Nazar. I'm Ukrainian Agribusiness Club, head of European Integration Committee. Few things I'd like to reflect over the discussion. First, and now this one. First and foremost, Hamon, thank you very much. I mean, we just help you to do this. We do not produce. We support you in this. How we can support in terms of plant protein. This is an idea that can work very much for the future. As faster EU would consider Ukraine as a balance partner, not just a supplier of import products, but as a balance partner, someone who can actually support in covering the balance sheet and to have a more forecasted and more stabilized, because EU should think of Ukraine not just as a provider of products, but as a partner who can cover the shortage. And this is that's basically reflects what you have asked. As faster we become a part of the balance sheet of the EU, as better it will be for EU to cover the gap. Also, the thing that correlates with this fact is that, and also correlates with the fact that as long as Ukraine can export to traditional markets, as longer European farmers are safe. That's very simple, that's on the table. However, there is a niche product that are in need in the EU, and soybean are one of those. So we do show ourselves as a mass producer for some cereals, but we also work on something very specific to supply to the EU market. That's about the plant protein. What is also important, and you've asked this question regarding the labor, and the thing that has not been spoken, or at least said out loud, is that Ukraine right now is teaching women to become drivers of combines. Why? We have Andriy Dikun, who is also the head of association, agricultural association, and Andriy can also speak much about this. Guys that used to drive combines in Ukraine, because the combines have European navigation system, were first to be mobilized to drive German Leopards. That's the case. Right now, women, we have some European programs working in Ukraine to teach women to drive the big vehicles. That's also to add to the point that Ukrainian agricultural sector is very much resilient because of the people and because of the need of the country to be resilient. And I think this is also one of the very important puzzles that will support EU in the future, because we are living in a very challenging time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. On the other side of the aisle here.
Thanks a lot. Nathalie Lecoq, Fediol, which is the vegetable oil and protein meal industry in Europe. Speaking about protein, speaking about regulation, soy, and I'm sorry to raise something which may seem as a detail, but to what extent is there focus on implementation of European deforestation regulation, which will come into application as of the end of this year? Thank you.
Good. Is there one more and then... Okay, I'm going to go to Joe Hoagland here, if that's okay. I will take you behind, sir, as well.
One very quick question, which kind of ties into this other question as well. I'm Joe Hoagland from the United States. It's well documented the effect the war has had on your cereal grain markets. But what was your plant protein market like before the war? Presumably you were selling to China. Do you still have access to the China market for soybeans?
Great question. And one final one, the gentleman behind Joe.
Bruno Mann from Copa Cogeca, European Farmers and Agri-Cooperative. So, I mean, the point on the soy is really interesting, because indeed we have a shortage of plant proteins in the EU, and it would be very interesting if that's something that could be filled by Ukraine, and where we could find synergies like this. So 2 questions. Do you find already other synergies possible like this one, other sectors that you have in mind? And then for the sectors where maybe it's not possible to find the synergies, and as you are saying, for example, on wheat, the prices that you are getting, I mean, you have your farmers in the right at the end of the month, and at the same time, it's putting pressure on the EU farmers as well. How do you expect to regain, let's say, your traditional market for those products that are more in competition directly with EU farmers? Thank you.
Okay, so just to recap, you may be busy over the next 5 minutes. Deforestation, plant proteins, access to the Chinese market, where the synergies are, and also how you intend to regain traditional markets where you may have been in competition with the Ukraine. It's not that neither of you two can comment, by the way, but...
Yeah, I would like to make a comment about deforestation, but okay.
We'll let Nazar lead off.
Well, very good. So about the deforestation, we follow with great interest the developments around the deforestation regulation. And for instance, also very informative were the reaction of EU main trading partners, so from Indonesia to Mercosur. There is one distinctive feature how we are different from other European partners in this respect. First, Ukraine will have a very rigid framework for compliance. We are talking about the pre-accession negotiations and association agreement that has a very strong, let's say, regulatory alignment element that sets us on a very, let's say, well-defined course of adapting to either existing or forthcoming EU regulatory developments. And this deforestation regulation is no exception. Second, once the pre-accession negotiations will start and we will slowly move towards sustainability chapter and agricultural chapter, that would be very much one of the priority aspects on our agenda. So please rest assured that Ukraine will take it very seriously, as compliance means full access to the internal market in the end. So this is the institutional logic that should give us the answer. At this point, I simply am unable to give you a very detailed response on how exactly the Ukrainian government, particularly the Ministry of Agriculture, is putting together plans to, let's say, to ensure compliance. But there is also a third very important economic or other environmental element. Ukraine would very likely even follow the same example. Ukraine is very, let's say, forestry deficit country. In the early 90s, at the dawn of our independence, Ukraine forested area amounted to approximately 18% of the entire land area of Ukraine. By 2014, unfortunately, this share decreased to 12%. So in fact, management of forests, let's say avoiding deforestation, has been a national priority for Ukraine. I would even refer you to a very infamous case, one of the first trade arbitration cases that was launched very soon after the association agreement went into force, that Ukraine banned export of log wood to the world in order to preserve, and let's say to lower as much as possible, to improve control over the illegal logging, and to encourage, let's say, more proper use of the wooded area. Regretfully, at that point, since the ban was in 2016, the European Union took the other side of the barricade. It was suing us in our bilateral arbitration panel, saying that our move was against the free trade and against the association agreement. So now the tables have turned. So in fact, we are on the same side of the aisle, together with the EU. For us, deforestation is a major problem. At least as far as we talk about the natural, let's say, environment, where the risk of deforestation linked gains in agricultural productivity are very low, because usually the center of productivity gains for agriculture, be it cereals, be it oil seeds, be it, for instance, other commodities, there has been usually central southern Ukraine. This is so-called forest steppe, or a semi-steppe natural area, traditionally poor with wooded areas. So for us, I think, again, I'm speculating here, but I would say that it will be not a difficult task for us to comply in terms of economic operators to prove that we are deforestation low risk environment. But again, without being too much demagogical, I would say that we have a very strict legislative institutional framework to ensure compliance. I hope I answered your question to your satisfaction. Maybe, Jill, you want to compliment this, and then we'll get back to this question.
I don't want to put a gloom light on this panel, but we should keep in mind also the reality of a war. I mean, I'm not so sure that it's the absolute priority for Ukraine nowadays. I mean, and when we speak about forest, the Russians use thermobaric bombs and they destroy complete forests. So I think that before complying with any, let's say, EU regulation meant for the EU in peacetime, we have to think about the forests which are currently destroyed, which needs to be cleaned and be replanted. I mean, that is an absolute priority, and I just like also to underline that this war is a type of 1914, 1918 war. It's not like these wars we had in the last decade. So priorities will need really to be realistic. It's my view. It's a personal statement, but from what I read and saw, I mean, we are far from this, let's say, environmental requirement, because everything has been destroyed by war. I just also like to add a very short comment to what the lady said about, let's say, global access to global markets and also protein production. That is in the paper, by the way. It's fully complementary. There is no contradiction here in our mind. And on top of that, don't forget food processing and moving Ukraine to higher value chain. I mean, there is a huge potential to process food and to export processed food from Ukraine, and not only raw material or commodities. I mean, that is something we need to think about in the future. Just a side remark.
Very good.
A very quick response to Mr. Hoagland's question about China and soybeans. Before the war, indeed, China was one of the major customers for Ukrainian soybeans. And in fact, let's say once we were able to restore the Black Sea logistics by the safely by the early 2023, I would say again, I need to check the figures, sir, and of course I would be very happy to get back to you. But on a general level, export to China were able somehow to recover. So the China's voracious appetite, in any case, overcome any, let's say, political limits that the China leadership may have had in this respect. So China continues to play a bit diminished, but still an important role, as long as the Black Sea route functions. Just to conclude this on a general note, we are very much mindful of these geopolitical tensions that exist, that are mounting. So in fact, we will continue to work rather with either with the South Asia or the MENA region, where there will be a growing demand, especially in the North African Rim. And at the same time, again, the signals from the Europeans, from the Belgian presidency about their need to bolster their sufficiency with soybeans is a very encouraging signal for us as well. But the problem is, not the problem, but rather, let's say, a limiting factor is, of course, compliance, standards compliance. This is a challenge that we do not have with countries like China or Southeast Asia. This is something, that is the task of our negotiating teams in the pre-accession process.
Good. We're almost out of time. I just want to give a final word to you, Dirk, and maybe as you do, if you wouldn't mind considering also the role of your own country, Germany, that's played such a critical role in all the efforts, including in the recovery conference last weekend. Your final perspective on what you've heard, your optimism also for the future, and the role that you think that countries like Germany and other member states in Europe can play in helping to address some of the things that we've been talking about here between Ukraine and the European Union. Dirk.
I think first of all the parties that are sitting around the table should realize the fact of a war. This has been in no business case of no investor, in no agricultural policy, neither on the EU side nor on the Ukrainian side. So very, very special and challenging circumstances. Secondly, I think for the part of Germany, everybody should be thinking where the country itself is coming from. And there has been very critical times, decades ago, that why is Germany today where it is or where it was maybe? Maybe economy is softer than we like, but making the comparison into Ukraine, the war is terrible as such, but not just rebuilding the country and its agriculture as it used to be before, but jumping 2 steps further will enable to increase competitiveness further significantly. So there's a unique opportunity to turn a crisis, a catastrophe, into a competitive advantage, and being a partner on the European continent, but also internationally in supplying food to the world. And I cannot see why, if we explain it right, French, German, Italian, whatever farmers in Western EU, why they cannot understand that this can be in a team play. But I think today it's a hot debate. Everybody is passing it around, and I think the farmers' protests, they are not coming because Ukraine is at the doorstep. They are coming because this EU bureaucratic monster is killing their entrepreneurial spirit. And so for me, the part of the solution, and I'm not in this Brussels environment every day, is rethinking the way forward for European agriculture. So it cannot continue like it is with the global agricultural policy, which is today, but rather working on a modernization of the current policy that could also integrate new memberships like Ukraine. So it's an evolution. You will not be able to do a revolution quickly, and there will be a lot of resistance, and particularly the political developments in some Western European, they will stop it even further. Yeah? So I think we need to talk a lot. We need to show the benefits, and I think it was mentioned there is ways. The door is opening a bit, so we don't need to go with hundred thousands of grain loads through this door, but we can come in with honey, we can with berries, we can do this and this. And over time, there will be more trading links where people will accept this is a good partnership to be in. And I'm also there. It's not bringing all the Ukrainian grain, corn, and soybeans to Europe now. No, I think it's a multi-phase exercise supplying the world. And if there is a good market and there is customers, why not bring it also to European Union? So I think we need to give it time. We need to give it the will to find a constructive solution. And if people get to the discussion table just to say, we are here to defend status quo, then we don't have to write mood yet. This is my opinion. So I think, and it's not to say one party is right or the other. It is more to say, when you want to play together, everybody needs to ready to play together. And this is maybe, we are not fully yet there, maybe.
Dirk, thank you very much indeed. That you've summarized it better than I could, I think. I think we had a very rich discussion on this panel, and thank you also to the audience for the observations that were shared. I certainly learned a lot. I mean, I think the priority of energy security, increasing the pace of finance to de-risk the environment for businesses certainly was something that struck me. The honest discussion about partnership versus competition that I think you were alluding to there, Dirk, as well, and also putting this in the context of the future of European agriculture as a whole, not just in Ukraine, not just in the European Union, but together as perhaps an important lens to look over this. I thought the perspective on the labour challenge that we had was particularly interesting, and I'm left, as I thought I might be when I came into it, with the impressive work of Ukraine and agriculture in terms of ensuring its continued resilience and productivity. Ladies and gentlemen, please do give our panelists a warm round of applause.